Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of FI Live Beta. We're still feeling our legs, getting our strength into this thing, and so glad that you're still along with us for the ride. We hope that you are ready for a great discussion today. We're talking about resilience. What is it? What exactly makes up resilience? How can we get it? How can we achieve it? How can we keep it? And I'm really, really looking forward to our special guest today. But first, let me bring on my co-pilot in this, reporter, assistant editor extraordinaire. I think I'm messing up your titles, Chris. But you're definitely, VIP at the Food Institute. It's Chris Campbell, one and only. Thanks, Chris, for joining us.
Not a problem. Good afternoon, everybody. I guess good morning if you're still on the West Coast, but really excited for this one today. It's going to be an interesting conversation. And I know we've talked a lot about the Great Resignation with the Food Institute. If you've been following our newsletters, there's also some CEO burnout going on in the food world right now. So definitely a topical, kind of conversation to be having. And we have a great guest. So I'll throw it back over to you, Susan, to get her on the show too.
All right. Let us not delay. Let's bring her in. She is a Dr. MD. She is a speaker, coach, expert, all things amazing. She's Dr. Eva Selhub, and she's with us today to talk about resilience. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Eva.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, this is such a pleasure. So you call yourself a resilience expert. So break it down for us. Tell us all about yourself. What do you do? What is a resilience expert? Why is that important right now?
That's a really good question. What is a resilience expert? A resilience expert is somebody who understands what it takes to achieve optimal resilience in a world that is often threatening, challenging, and difficult. And that means that I have the expertise to understand physical health, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, as well as having an understanding of how things work on a practical sense, both in your personal and professional life, that enables any individual to capture the strengths and the signature strengths, if you will, that each individual can have to manage adversity and eventually get to a place where you're flourishing, where you're not only doing well, but you're happy and overflowing with energy. So it's a multifaceted approach. Many resiliency experts focus more so, on one thing or the other. There's a lot of resiliency experts that are physical resilience. They're all about, toughness and sort of military kind of lifestyle and, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and, being a Navy SEAL. And then there's the positive psychologists that focus on mental health and emotional well-being and emotional regulation, as well as spirituality. And, then there's those of us that bring it all together and also bring in the practical approach and what actually happens in real life and how you can take that and make it all work so that you can be resilient. So that's sort of what I do, given that I'm a medical person. I have a medical background. I've worked in the mind-body medicine field, and taught that at Harvard for over 20 years. And I've been working either as a clinician or as a coach for 25 to 30 years or so. I've brought together my own personal experience as well as working with people to figure out a way to help people cultivate resilience.
Yeah, thanks so much for that summary. And what I find so interesting is that, in this black and white world, where you're either one or the other, it's like there doesn't seem to be room for gray. It's like you bring those worlds together, the worlds of like people who are tough, and then the world full of people who, just want you to be at peace and just have joy in your life. It seems like, you want to bring those worlds together to help people realize, it is important to be tough, but you can't get there unless you have that, we were talking about this before, that compassion, right?
Well, it's understanding that as human beings, we're innately resilient. You're born with it. I mean, you wouldn't be here, and anyone listening to this right now, you're resilient because you're actually here taking the time to actually listen to this, which means you've been through a lot of other things to make it possible for you to take this hour to even listen. So I think I said this to you in our earlier discussion, just getting through the birth canal is quite challenging. Making it through your teenage years is challenging. So, we are hardwired to be able to manage adversity. That's how our ancestors, that's why we even have a species. So resilience is something that you're born with. The question is the ability to cultivate it and make it stronger is also within all of us. Though for many people is what Dr. Seligman calls it the learned helplessness theory, where we have a myriad of negative experiences that cause us to lose hope and to feel more helpless. And that takes us to the other end of the scale of resilience, so that sort of learned helplessness versus that belief in resilience. So we all have that capability, and it is, a myriad of factors that plays into the ability to fully be, optimally resilient. And it's a question of, what parts do I need to work more on?
Interesting. Those are really interesting points. I feel like, and as I segue into, resilience within the corporate world, in particular, it seems like something that we all can learn about, think about, like, how to break out that helplessness. I mean, I don't think it's news to anyone to, bring up, the difficulties that people face in the corporate world, whether you're an employee or an employer. So I've taken the liberty of gathering a couple statistics. I mean, especially in these times, I'm just going to put it up on the screen. There was a survey done by Deloitte. It was on the topic of burnout. Out of 1,000 respondents, you see here 77% of employees surveyed are experiencing burnout at their current job. 64% are frequently stressed at work. And nearly 70% of professionals feel their employers are not doing enough to prevent or alleviate burnout within their organization. Dr. Selhub, what comes to mind for you when you look at these statistics?
Well, first of all, I know these statistics well because I'm currently writing, the book Burnout for Dummies. So I'm literally in the process of writing the book as we speak. So I'm very, very familiar with these figures, and there's no, there's no question that it's true. Considering that we've been through a pandemic, considering the stress that people have been under as a result of the pandemic, and the stress that existed prior to the pandemic, and you put it all together, and you don't have either the coping skills to manage that stress or the support infrastructure to help people mitigate that stress, the result is going to be that your fuel tank is going to run out dry, and you're going to end up feeling really burned out. So, as I said, just like it takes, many factors to be resilient in any given situation, it also takes many different factors to bring about burnout. So those are going to be both personal factors, and they're also going to be factors related to the job itself and what's happening. So it's not unusual for this to have happened.
Would you say that then, since I'm going to put up the stats again, I mean, it's the environment that they're in, right? It's the environment that the employees are in, right? In that corporate culture, the office.
It's multifactorial.
Mm-hmm.
So the majority of the issue is the environment, right? However, there's some people that are thriving more than others. Now, again, looking at these percentages, the majority of people are not thriving. So that tells you that there is something wrong with the environment, right? It doesn't take a genius statistician to figure that out. And, and unless you change the environment, those numbers aren't really going to change. So, but there's also a personal aspect to this. So there's personal tendencies to say perfectionism, right? So you want everything to be perfect, or the personal tendency not to be able to get offline, and you have to be connected all the time. We call it the FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. So we have personal tendencies that draw us into a behavior pattern that can lead to overwork and overwhelm, or personal coping tendencies where we're not able to cope effectively with certain types of stress, or our emotions get in the way, if you will. So that doesn't help. So what happens is that depending on, pre-existing conditions, personal care habits, right? So if you're not putting nutrient-rich food into your body and not getting adequate sleep, or you're having issues at home, going through a divorce or whatever that is, that's going to impact your ability to handle what's ever happening in your work environment. So it's the perfect storm, really. And what we're seeing is that the majority of people are experiencing the perfect storm. So again, what's the commonality? What's the common factor? Well, the work environment is a common factor. The pandemic is a common factor. Social isolation is a common factor. And then we say, well, what can we do to improve the common factors? What's in our control to change? And what's not in our control to change? We can't change the fact that there's a pandemic or a war, but we can change our approach. We can change our coping habits. We can change our self-care habits. And hopefully we can change the system within which people are working.
Right. That's a
leadership.
I'm sorry, say that again.
To leadership.
Right. Perfect segue to what I was gonna talk, shift into next. It's not, we've been doing our research. It's not just employees that are feeling the burn. I'm gonna put up from our recent article about CEOs that our very own Brian Choi had done. And a really interesting factor, within the past, month, maybe even few weeks, we've seen CEO departures from Starbucks, Domino's, Wingstop, Denny's, and Red Lobster. That CEO of Red Lobster left just after 8 months of running the company. So there's something here that's happening within the employer society as well. And in the article, we put it up here: challenges currently faced by CEOs, changing consumer tastes and preferences, investor-backed companies demanding more results faster, employee turnover and hiring issues. We did an article about, great resignation, that trend, the great regret. You've got employees, as a result of pandemic, really looking into themselves and, trying to figure out, okay, what do I really want to do? Do I want to, what should I really be, focusing on now that I'm realizing that my life is finite, So you've got, this trend, of employees leaving, hiring, leaving again, and that's affecting the employer workplace, unionization, and rapidly rising inflation. So, given these challenges faced by leadership, right? What are your thoughts about the need right now, Dr. Eva, for resilience in the high-performing individual? What are your first thoughts when you think about at the leadership level about resilience? Do our leaders have it these days? If they don't, why? Let's explore that space.
Well, first of all, that is who I normally work with, as people in the leadership space. So this is something that I'm witnessing every day in my coaching practice. And the first of all, again, as I stated before, all humans are resilient. We have a propensity to resilience. And for the most part, people that are in leadership positions are resilient, and that's why they got there. So that is, the first thing is that that's sort of an inherent trait. The thing is that people are realizing now is that values are changing. What is important to us, and are the core values that drive and guide us. Your core values are your guiding compass that sort of determine which path you're going to take, or how you're going to be, or how a company or a culture of a company is going to be. And what's happened in the past couple years is everything that's happened has caused people to actually reevaluate their core values, and realizing that their core values are not in cahoots with the culture of the company or the culture of what they're doing. And they're thinking, well, this isn't even what I want to do anymore. And so there are people that are leaving because they're finding that I don't even want to do this anymore. So it has, not much to do with even the food industry, but it's saying, I don't want to work in the food industry anymore because the nature of the food industry, the culture of the food industry is such. So unless they change the nature of the food industry, it's not a place where I really feel like I want to be anymore. I want to be in a different type of culture that matches my core values. The other piece of it is saying, well, and that's basically saying, I like what I do. I like being a CEO. I like being, a CFO. I just don't want to be a CFO in this culture. So saying, I like my job, but I don't like the culture, right? And so the other thing is saying, that, maybe I belong doing something different altogether. So it's not the wrong company. It's the wrong job. Like, I don't even want to be doing this. I want to be teaching, or, I want to be leading tours in Africa or whatever. So it might be that the core values lead you to realize that I don't even want to, do this anymore. So the first thing is this person acknowledging, who I am, what are my core values, what's important to me, and how to have compassion for myself and the way I feel, as opposed to, and this is sort of the tricky part, because most people in leadership positions, especially if you got investors or backers or whoever knocking at your door, expecting things from you, you're expected to be a certain way. There are expectations of you to behave in a certain way and act in a certain way and do things in a certain way. And you've expected that of yourself all this time. I remember thinking, well, this is how a doctor's supposed to behave. I can't be quirky. I can't, I'm supposed to be like this way. And I'm supposed to be like how I should be, and the supposed to's and the shoulds. And so the first step in working with anyone, especially in leadership, is understanding, who am I? What are my core values? How can I have honor and self-compassion for my feelings, who I am, the way I feel in my past, and what I really, really want, like and don't like? And is this in cohesion? Am I in coherence with my culture? And that's on one hand. On the other hand, of knowing, so I have the ability to affect change in my culture. And some people do, and some people don't, depending on the organization and the culture. Like you pointed out, if there's a lot of investors that are, pushing at the door and putting you down, then there's not much you're going to be able to do about it, unless you choose a culture where the investors are like-minded. So, or you do some type of program or initiative for these backers, or for changing the culture of the company so that it starts matching your core values. So, it's a multifaceted approach. But again, starting with the leadership, they're the ones that have, you're a leader because you are resilient and you have the ability to affect change. But the question is how are you taking care of yourself so that you can do that in a positive way?
Dr. Selhub, I have a follow-up here, and we're taking a look at this image again. I would argue consumer taste, the investors and the rapidly rising inflation are all kind of things that are outside of an executive's bucket. They don't have direct control over those two things, or three things, I should say. But taking a look at the turnover issues and then even unionization, to me, I think that's something where an executive has a little bit more control over how those things would play out. And I'm just wondering, from your vantage point, taking a look at that, to me, it seems almost like a disconnect in messaging and trust between employees and leaders. So taking a look at those things, could you speak a little bit to that? This rising unionization effort across the US, to me, seems to be very connected to that, and maybe some thoughts and tips of the trade just to kind of address those things if you're a company that's kind of facing those headwinds at the current moment.
Well, I think that's a really, really wonderful question, and you want to, when we look at things like this that happen, an uprising of something, right? An uprising of something comes because there was something prior to it that preceded it that was unjust or unequal, right? So, a flower doesn't just grow. It grows because there's room for it to flourish and grow. And something doesn't get invented unless there's a need for it, right? So the question that needs to be asked is, why is there a lack of trust that unions need to be formed? Right? So, and what are the unions trying to say? What is the message and what is the outcome? And the problem is that unless people understand common humanity, that everyone is suffering and everyone's trying to find the best way to thrive. And if we appreciate and have compassion for the way people feel and their needs, as well as our own, then we can find a way to work together to create something that is prosperous and profitable for everybody. But what happens is that because people are fearful, they go into fight or flight, it becomes an us and them factor rather than let's cohesively and coherently try to figure this out and make sure core values are matching and that we get to an outcome that is best for all concerned. And if it's not the right place for you, then you can go. And if it's the right place for you, then you can stay, and so on and so forth, whether you're an employee or leadership. But the key is to recognize that this notion that, unions are there to attack leadership, and leadership then either has to defend, desist, or offend or defend or whatever that is. And we're into this kind of war mentality, which we are very clear does nothing but destroy. So again, the first thing is to use that experience of people turning over and unions coming up and the need to protect employees or figure out a way to keep people, is you have to remove the fear from the equation, because making fear-based decisions never helps anybody. There has to be a place of equanimity and compassion that you have to find within yourself as a leader. So then you can actually look at the big picture and mine the strengths and resources and be able to figure out what is the best solution. It's not going to come overnight, but the ability to have discussion, create a safety and feedback, and understand the need for flexibility and the sharing of values is going to set you on the right path to finding a good solution.
Yeah, I found it really interesting, Dr. Eva, when you were talking about, the issues of fear, decisions based on fear, the lack of trust. I mean, it seems like, it's all about trust, right, between the employee and the employer. And it seems like, from our past conversations, a lot of it is to do with, when you are a leader, in pursuit of establishing that trust, you need to show, I feel like part of it is like, you need to show your humanness, and you need to get back in touch with that. Because as you were saying before, our culture is such that we engender this mentality of like a CEO has to be this or that, like they're not allowed to do this or that. And so, I mean, to me, it seems like, at the leadership level, like you have to be tough. You have to be able to do, things without feeling, and you can't be quote unquote weak or wimpy. But in actuality, what you're saying is they have to tap into their human side, to be able to have that compassion in themselves and in other people. And then when you have that, then you can start to kind of establish that relationship.
It's important to have it's not about not having feelings. It's about having equanimity, to be balanced in the way you feel so that you can make objective decisions, maybe function from your highest place for the highest good. And that isn't always going to be nice. It's what we call tough love sometimes, right? But it's the best things for all concerned. It's being able to recognize that you care about an individual, but they're in the wrong role for their personality type. We've talked about this recently. I have one CEO who's too nice. He's too nice to people, doesn't want to hurt their feelings. And meanwhile, the person's not doing a good job where they are, and it's setting everybody up for failure. Mm-hmm. It's setting up the employee to feel like they're a failure, and it's not helping the company any. So to be able to create a level of accountability that is more objective from a level of equanimity, and equanimity comes from a state of mindfulness and compassion that you learn how to practice yourself, and then you can implement in the things that you do, then allows for more balanced decision making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like this segues into a question we have from O1 Brian Choi. Dr. Eva, what are some practical ways that leaders can affect culture? Can you give an example? And I love the anecdote that you brought up a little bit, the CEO that was too nice. What was something that they could have done, right? Because I think you mentioned what they saw as a solution was just giving that person like more responsibility or like a higher, a bigger role, more pay, thinking that would give them, maybe a boost in their confidence.
Yeah.
What happened with that, and what do you think?
Well, that person ended up leaving and going a job somewhere else where the responsibilities were much less and much simpler. And what they weren't realizing was that this person was feeling already overwhelmed and anxious and was completely loaded with self-doubt. And this was somebody who they actually referred to me to work with, and who was what I will say, I'll call that person either not coachable or not ready to be coached. And a person who's not ready to be coached is somebody who's not willing to let go of their identity of victimization. They're not ready to let go of whatever fear-based belief system or limited belief system they've had their whole lives, because that's what they know. It's who they know that they are, or think they are. And they're not really ready to let that go. And those people aren't just ready to for my kind of coaching anyway. They're ready for therapy, maybe for psychological therapy, and because they want to, continue to work through whatever trauma or emotional issues they might have, but they're not ready to actually let go of that inner critic or fear-based thinking. And so I knew that about this person and had, given my feedback as such. So again, there are a couple options. Either one, talk with this individual, say, I recognize this is how you feel, what would work for you, and see if there's roles within the company that then would work, or support them to go find another job, right? I mean, if you really care about them. So that's just an example of one employee who ended up just leaving on their own because they just were too overwhelmed. And, and it had nothing to do with the company being, a bad company. The company is a very caring company. There just aren't healthy boundaries in place. So, you can go to these either extremes, and it's understanding, how do I change the culture as I start with the core values? What are the core values of this company? What are the core values of leadership? Is it generosity? Is it integrity? Is it honesty? Is it collaboration? What is it that we truly believe in, and how are we going to be accountable for that? So the next step is then to create measures of accountability of how we are going to communicate in that way. How do we do our inter-office communications that show collaboration, integrity, mindfulness, or whatever? You choose sort of a character strengths that, so Martin Seligman came up with 24 character strengths, and his colleagues Peterson, that play to what allows a community or an individual flourish and thrive. And they're sort of separated into 6 virtues. And you can sort of look at that and say, well, what are our character strengths? What are our virtues as a company or as leaders that we want to uphold and to be manifested in our everyday existence? And so that will play into, how we view our individuals, how do we view our human beings that work for us? So it doesn't mean being soft and lenient, by the way. It just means that you have boundaries and parameters from which you function that have high virtues. So that would be the difference. And of course, it's easier done when you're a smaller company and you're forming yourself, as opposed to one that's already established and then have to go backwards. But it's still very possible. I know companies have created culture community committees to start figuring out, how do we create change the culture of a company to one that's resilient and thriving. What do we need to change? And they involve leadership in that process.
Chris, I know there's something that you wanted to refer to, but actually what you just said, Dr. Eva, it actually reminds me, the other day I was looking at Netflix and I saw a documentary about Abercrombie and Fitch. I'm sure you both remember that. That place, that was a very famous clothing company fraught with allegations of racism, sexism, rampant discrimination. I have a friend of mine who experienced racism, just after working there in a store like 10 years ago of theirs, for a month. Upon just interest, looking at Instagram, seeing that they are still around, but they've completely changed their identity. They've completely turned it around. They're making very impassioned efforts, right, to put a new face forward, one that is, they put it all over their stories, like inclusivity, diversity, right? They show their C-level team. It's like a rainbow of different, ethnic backgrounds. I don't know if you've seen that lately, but it seems to me it's like a textbook example of a company that's really striven and seems to be succeeding at turning their, culture around, and they're still out there. And I think people are buying their clothing and they're,
Right. And that's a perfect example of how to adapt to adversity and change. And this brings me back to sort of that statement that you made before about the unions and the job turnovers. You can either approach this with fear, or you can look at it as opportunity. I personally feel when I have hardship in my life, it's sort of like angels in disguise that are sort of dropping into my life to wake me up, to open my eyes up to possible change and growth, and how I can learn. And how it's not saying that, this happened for a reason, I think that that's a bit trite, but to say, how can I find meaning or reason in what's happening to me? Right? How do I use this situation as an opportunity for growth and learning and improvement and adaptability and resiliency? So all these people, rather than saying, it's us against them, is saying, okay, well, all these people are leaving. What can I learn from this? How can I grow? What do we need to change? And if you don't learn from your mistakes, you're going to get bit in the butt, right? And it's going to come back to hurt you or your company. And that I've seen happen over and over and over again. Is that they might sort of make a little bit of a shift, or they might get upset or be punitive or whatever they do, but they don't use the opportunity for learning, growth, and change. And then it comes back to hit them even harder the second time or third time around. So if you have a situation where somebody's complaining about not a lack of inclusivity, or you have a situation where somebody is complaining that they're not feeling safe to give feedback, you listen and you then create change.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, Chris, did you have a question you wanted to?
Yeah, I'm actually going to bring it back a little bit, back to that anecdote you shared about the employee and kind of the employer's misdiagnosing what she was actually looking for. And it kind of ties into this question from Kelly Beaton. And he's asking, what signs can a business leader look for if they're trying to turn the tide of their workplace when the culture is turning negative, and sort of any red flags that an employer could see that kind of diagnose this instead of, finding the harsh reality after the employee actually leaves. So is there any tips or tricks you could share about kind of, looking through your workforce and trying to find if there are any of these pain points there?
Well, the first thing is I'm going to tell you is assume that the pain points are there. It's not about looking for them. It's assuming that they're there. It's close. I mean, look at those statistics. It is highly, highly unlikely that you have a group of people that are satisfied. Just not likely. Okay, so just assume they're there and then start taking action to change. So what are their actions to change is you say, okay, how do I create safety so that people can provide us with feedback and let us know what they're thinking and what they're feeling and whether or not they feel safe enough to give us feedback? Do I honor the feedback of my employees? Do I listen? Are they telling me what they want? Am I capable of providing them what they want? Is there a middle ground? Is there some type of collaborative nature that we can take? What are our core values? Are we behaving in a way that is matching these core values? What are the core values of our employees? Are they in alignment with our core values? So you start actually doing a treatment plan. You have to triage, right? This is not about saying, is it there? It's there. How do I triage? So the first triage is check in with yourself. Make sure that you're not functioning from a place of fear. Find your state of equanimity and self-compassion. Do your work, take care of yourself, and start foraging forward and saying, okay, given that I know that most of these people here are feeling misaligned, not valued, and overwhelmed. What is the first thing that we want to do? This isn't about throwing pizza parties at the end. Obviously providing people with food is never, a negative thing if they want it. But you know that that's what they want. So a lot of this is, creating a safe environment for people to provide you with feedback. So that could be a co-creation of an environment that is more productive. It doesn't mean like giving the kids all the power. It just means listening to what they want.
That reminds me again of what you had shared, that company had mistakenly thought, like, okay, I'll just give that person, a better, which I feel like that might be, something that a lot of companies might do mistakenly at a time when, you have, it's such a highly polarized time and people are demanding, right, understandably, their fair share, right? Things that they feel disenfranchised of. But I feel like what you're talking about is such a relevant distinction between like people should get what they have earned, what they deserve, but it shouldn't be just like a Band-Aid on like a deeper wound.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. There's no Band-Aiding this. It's not, and you don't know where that person's going to stay or whether they're going to go. And that cannot be your intention, that I'm going to do what I can for this individual to keep them from going. It's how do I make the system better And then you attract the people that are going to stay, and they're going to help it thrive and grow because they believe in the company.
Mhm.
And do you believe in the company?
Mhm.
Right? If you don't believe in the company, how do you get other people to believe in the company? And if you're disinvolved and disenchanted, how are you going to get people to then support you and be there for you? This is about, being able to be the leader in your community. Think of it as your neighborhood watch or your community. And if you don't care about your community, why should they care about you?
Yeah, yeah. And I want to bring it back to what you were saying, before. It's like it starts with the self. And so it seems, more relevant than ever in corporate culture. Again, it starts with the leadership. The leaders have to look in themselves and, figure out, what's important to them, how to figure it all out, to gain what we've been, the topic of our conversation, resiliency. So I want to bring up your 6 pillars of resilience. I love that term. We've got physical vitality, emotional equilibrium, mental toughness and clarity, spiritual purpose, healthy personal relationships, and being an inspiring leader and part of a wider community. Can you break down, each of these terms for us, Dr. Eva?
Sure. So I think anybody can appreciate that it's very difficult to manage your adversity or challenges when you feel sick. So your life force, as in traditional Chinese medicine is referred to as your qi, your energy, is literally what allows you to exist. It's what allows you to move forward in the world, to lift something off the ground, and to use your brain to make decisions. And if that's faltering, then you're nothing, right? And I always say, I love wealth and financial gain, but all that money is worth nothing if I'm dead. So, and I'm no use to anyone if I'm sick. So, and the pandemic is sort of brought that to light very well because it didn't care. That virus doesn't care how old you are, how young you are, how, what color your skin is. It'll get you. And if you don't have the bandwidth, the physical bandwidth to handle that, then you got really, really sick, depending on what your predisposition was. So this isn't about a matter of wellness, it's a matter of fitness. So I sort of explain to people sort of the health curve that we have in Western medicine is it's kind of a bell-shaped curve. And at the extreme end of the curve is sickness. And the way modern medicine measures wellness is by parameters that say that you're not sick, right? We don't measure, like in Western medicine, they don't measure vitality. They measure whether or not you're not sick, right? Because according to your BMI or your cholesterol, your blood pressure, that there's a normal blood pressure you're supposed to have. But is there like a supreme blood pressure that you need to have? Right? So they don't measure fitness, but fitness is your ability to withstand stress and have a huge cushion, come what may, when, something comes your way. So I would rather, feel fit to climb up a hill than to be well, because well means I'm pretty close to being sick. And so we want to know where we are in that curve so that we have a big cushion or a lot of fuel in our tank to make the drive that we know we're going to need to make in the life that we call life. So physical vitality is going to include, both the exercise that you do, the nutrient-rich fuel you put in your body, the time you take for rest and recovery, which is just as important as activity, which is going to be your sleep or meditation, relaxation time, whatever that may be. So time for rest and recovery is going to be what you do for joy and fun and play to enrich yourself. Your anything that has to do with revitalizing your energy, whether that's doing meditation or yoga or exercise, nutrition, being out in nature. So that's sort of questioning of each individual's own physical vitality. I'm a human being in a human body, and it's the vessel that allows me to exist in this world. How healthy is my vessel? Most people take better care of their cars than they take care of their own bodies. So that's why it's important, because above all else, you're a human being. And the human being is in a human body. So learn to connect with and take care of your body. That's about most important. And then when you do that, you're also aware that it's important for other people to do that, for, let's say, your employees. The next one is the ability to maintain emotional equilibrium. As I've mentioned before, no decision is made when there is an emotional charge. No good decision is made, either professionally or personally. And most of the time, people have an easier time making professional decisions because there's less emotionality there, as opposed to ones that are related to their personal life. So being able to maintain emotional equilibrium is a process of mindfulness, of being non-judgmentally aware, in moment-to-moment awareness, being able to work with your emotions to support you, to find solutions as opposed to um, control your behavior. So being self-aware and finding ways to create that balance is going to help you not only thrive, but be able to use situations for opportunities for growth rather than to be hurt by them. That brings you to the next thing, so that when we create emotional regulation and balance, we're better able to access the noggin, your intellect, and your ability to think more clearly and to look at a situation and see it as an opportunity for growth. Is what we call the growth mindset, as opposed to limited mindset. And so being able to have that belief and positive expectation of knowing that come what may, I'll be able to do this, I'll be able to tough it out, we'll be able to figure this out. And so that mental toughness and mental clarity also comes from being able to take care of yourself physically, having emotional equilibrium, different practices that allow you to overcome limited belief systems and be able to maintain that growth mindset. The next one, which I feel is the one that transcends all the pillars, it brings all pillars back together. And it's what essentially allows a leader to really be a true influential leader, is our spiritual purpose and connection. So spirituality doesn't necessarily mean religion. It just means the profound connection to something greater. So that ability to make meaning out of pretty much anything. I love this notion that there's that question that we most pose, like, what's the meaning of life? And that's not what a spiritual connection actually entails. It's not asking that question, but more so, how can I get more meaning from life? So when we live with that question in mind, is how can I get meaning from my situations, from my life, from any situation, from showing gratitude, connection with others in that deeper sense, whether it's nature or God or whatever you believe in, that we know confers better resilience, more ability to flourish, a better ability to lead, be conscious and conscientious. So there's different ways to cultivate that spiritual connection, find purpose and meaning in what you do, and then enable that purpose and meaning to then overflow into others and what you do and how you influence things around you. So that again leads to your relationships. So we are social beings. We have an innate desire, that means it's hardwired, desire to belong. It's actually what allows our species to stay afloat. The love hormone oxytocin allows us to bond, to stay together and be connected. And without it, we wouldn't be human and we wouldn't be able to exist. So cultivating healthy relationships, healthy boundaries, whether those social connections are at work or at home, they're incredibly important for the role that resilience plays. Again, who supports you and who you support is going to make a difference when there's a famine or a shortage. And your ability to survive, or your family's ability to survive. And last but not least, it's like knowing that every single one of us is a leader to a certain extent, in that we have influence over something else. Whether you're a boulder or you're a pebble, you create a ripple in the water, which means you have influence. And understanding that I have influence, and when I take care of myself and I take to my other pillars, then I recognize that influence is then goes out to others, and I have the ability to support and help others, that I have the ability to influence the awareness, the livelihood, the well-being of another person in my leadership capabilities, and to work on those.
Yeah, thank you so much for the in-depth explanation. It makes things really come alive. To me, these bullet points, all make sense. But I'm also reminded of, when we're thinking about, resilience at the sea level, how do you speak to companies that have been successful through a very different style of leadership? You know, I'm thinking of, Brian mentioned in one of our previous conversations, Jack Welch of GE, very militaristic style of leadership, right? Whatever he said goes, right? Like he's like, my way is the right way, and that's it. And if you don't like it, then you don't like it, right? Very much like a, like a soldier commander, type thing. Why was it that he, I mean, and obviously he was very successful. So what was it about him and about that company, and how he was, able to lead that company to success?
Well, first of all, I don't know enough about the rest of how he led that would have added to the success of the company. And also keeping in mind that we are in different times. What worked then is not going to work now. What worked then, we have to remember, like, even in the I call it the Liberty Beaver Era, where everyone said, this is what you're supposed to do, and that's what people did. You're supposed to, women are supposed to be in the kitchen, and, men are supposed to, go to work and bring home the bacon. And that's what you do, and you don't go out of that rigid infrastructure. So that wasn't even that long ago, 50 years ago. Okay. Think of all the changes that have happened in the past 50 years that have changed the way we view ourselves. We view what's right and we view what's wrong. Our moral code, moral compass is different. And what people are willing to withstand has changed, especially over the past couple of years. So people have been connected with their own values and what's important to them. And they are just, we're not going to take it anymore. So in the past, and if he said, this is my way, take it or leave it, then the people might have said, well, I'm okay with that. That meshes with my core values and what I'm willing to do. And that's, if he gave them that ability to say, I'm going to stay or I'm not going to stay, then people choose to stay. They know what's important to understand about that, which is what I do in the companies I work with, is you create a set of expectations and accountability. You know what is expected of you. There is no black and white. I mean, there is no gray, right? There isn't like, oh, well, this is in your job description, but I really need you to do this because we've lost a couple people. It's sitting down and coming up with, these are the roles and real responsibilities that I'm expecting of you. This is what I'm going to be expected to do in response as your leader or as your boss. And this is what we're going to hold each other to be accountable for, because this is sort of the set expectations, and you take into account the core values. And so then when you meet regularly, you know whether or not you're meeting those core values, you're meeting those expectations and what you're supposed to be accountable for. But there aren't a lot of clear delineation and accountability in most companies that I've noticed. So it might be that in that company, there was a very clear demarcation of accountability and roles and expectations, and you're either able to stay and live up to that or not. And if you lived up to that, you succeeded. And that feels really good when you accomplish something. So a lot of the reasons people are leaving is they feel like failures, because no matter what they do, it's not enough and nothing changes. So there has to be a clear demarcation of accountability and the expectation. So if you are going to be more militaristic, then it needs to be that way. But the other person on the end, the leader, needs to be accountable for something that they might not be doing either. So it has to be on both ends so that you can create that feeling of trust. And that's one of the things that we know in military style leadership, is that you know that you can trust your leader to take a bullet for you. Now, do we know that leaders are doing that now? So there's value that can be taken from different leadership styles, but we also have to take into account, what are the value systems now? People just don't do what you tell them to do anymore. They question everything. And you need to have good reason, and you need to set up clear demarcation of healthy boundaries and expectations and accountability.
Yeah, I love what you're explaining, because it's making me realize, to your point, it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more about it's not like you're pushing one style of leadership. It's like you're saying, the CEO it's up to them to figure out what their style of leadership is. And it will only work if it's a two-way street. There has to be the trust, and everyone has to be on the same page. So if someone does want to have that military style of leadership, then all parties involved have to be okay with that.
And be aware of not being punitive. That's really, really important because being punitive is not going to help build trust. One of the companies I had worked for, the one of the leaders was very much like that and extremely punitive. Do as I say. And if you don't do as I say, then you're bad. However, even when people did as they were told, and that didn't work out, right? They did what they were told, but it wasn't successful. They still took the blame, as opposed to leadership saying, "Oh, well, that's my fault. I'm going to be accountable for telling you to do it in that way, and it didn't work. Let's find a solution for it to work." So it's do as I say, and also let's collaborate to make sure that I'm getting your input. So it's if somebody's okay, and it's again, there's certain personality types that don't want to have input. They just want to say, "Tell me what to do, and I'll do it." But if you have somebody who's an independent thinker, they're not going to do well in that kind of scenario. And what I'm trying to say is it's very rare to have people nowadays who don't want to have input. There used to be more people that were okay with that because maybe they weren't okay, but that's what you did. That was the culture. That's what we did. It was the Liberty Beaver era, right? Now we question everything because we can. So that's the problem, is that type of leadership style may not work anymore.
That's a good point. That's a good point to bring up. Yeah, Brian, we brought you back up. We brought you in.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no, I just wanted to share, as I came on board as the leader of Food Institute, it's a almost 100-year-old organization going from a nonprofit to a for-profit, and the transition that I've seen the company go through has just been extremely dramatic. And I wanted to give an opportunity for Chris here. And this is not self-promotion or Food Institute, like promoting Food Institute in any way, but I wanted Chris to give an honest some examples of what he saw in the past, because he's been with the company for 8.5 years versus what he sees now. So some of the major changes, some things that have worked, and even some things that may have not worked. So this is really an open discussion, and for Chris an opportunity to share like what he saw as organizational resilience, especially with this change the past 24 months.
I would say at the start here, before Brian took over, we were a very traditional company. We had the office, it was commute in, very strict hours, getting in at a specific time. And I think the biggest thing that has changed, and obviously fueled by the pandemic, but the flexibility aspect. A lot of people don't know this, but Food Institute is fully remote. And I think it's a huge credit to this company that we're still doing this. We're not being called back into an office. And I think a lot of people on our team really, really appreciate that. I don't have kids myself, but a lot of our team members do. I know Brian and Susan have 2 young ones at home as well. So having the flexibility to log in when your schedule allows for it is huge for our company. And I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing so much success. Brian really trusted us during the pandemic. I remember, I'll never forget this. It was a couple of weeks before the pandemic really hit in force, and we kind of had an informal poll in the office, like, do you feel comfortable coming to work? And, it was anonymous, but I'm assuming it was 100% no, I'm no longer comfortable coming to work. And we basically shifted to, remote. I would say just about overnight. Brian, you can kind of fill in there, but I know that I don't think you were very confident at the time. You really were, I know, from an era and an area that was really dependent on, in-person meetings. And to your credit, you gave us that trust, and I think it's kind of paying dividends. And I think we were talking a little bit about this, Dr. Selhub, but it comes down to personality types. A lot of our staff at the time were writers, introverts that weren't really interested in losing, an hour and a half of their day to a commute, or they weren't feeling particularly energized inside the office. So I think that transition here at the Food Institute has really been paying dividends. And I know me personally, it's really helped with my growth as well. I'm not a full introvert, but, I do have introvert tendencies. So having the ability to just kind of, be able to recharge in my own space has been really helpful for my growth. I'd imagine a lot of people on the team here too. So maybe we can kind of close it up with that, just talking a little bit about if you are a CEO, kind of dealing with those different personality types and kind of, taking those 6 pillars you're talking about. How do you, after you kind of master them for yourselves, how do you create that, culture and environment that allows, the people that are working under you to start taking those steps as well?
I think that's a really good question. I think you can sort of recap it in taking those 6 pillars for yourself as an individual and then saying, well, how do I apply those 6 pillars to my company, right? As a leader, then I'm concerned about the physical welfare of my organization. So that could mean having some type of wellness program if you want. That's something that I've initiated with a couple companies. There's a sort of a question of, do wellness programs really work and how do you initiate them, especially with people being remote. But it's taking into account that I care about your physical health. Not to mention that when you help people in their physical health, and if you're self-insured, it's going to help your bottom line because they're going to have less healthcare utilization. And right now, healthcare utilization is quite high because people are burned out. So it's sort of doing an inventory of saying, okay, it might be like doing an initial survey. How would you rate your physical health? What kind of support do you need in your physical health? Maybe you offer, discounts of memberships to health clubs, or everybody gets an app, or you do wellness challenges and things like that create some type of incentives for people. And what's nice about the wellness challenges is that it also gets them to sort of communicate with each other socially. So it starts building those social connections. So that's on one. So getting back into, then we go into social connections. Well, how do we improve the social connections within the company? And create opportunity for people to have social connection outside of the company, right? With whomever they wish or with one another. So looking for ways to create opportunity for improved social connection and improved communication. So look at, what are our pathways of communication? Do we have ways of communicating clearly? Are there ways for people to provide feedback in a safe way? Do people feel that they can rely on each other to delegate information? Do I have the right people in the right roles so that they feel competent and capable to do what they need to do and then share with each other and trust with each other? So it's going to be looking at sort of the infrastructure. And you can probably do that again. You start with leadership, teach leadership what to do, and then they take with their own little areas. And each area sort of looks at, what is the infrastructure of my area? What is the sort of the flow chart? What is the flow chart for communication? Are there signals that are getting mixed? Do we know, like, a lot of people don't know who to go to anymore for something. So it's actually like looking at making something as simple as that, as creating better organization or succession plans, so people know, oh, well, I can go to that person for mentorship or questioning. So creating sort of mentorship programs, ways for people to socialize, improve communication pathways. So that in itself is going to be just a huge way to create more accountability and also sociability within your organization. So that would be sort of the social piece. Again, you could have, bring in mindfulness training. You can bring in human resources people, for having people know that they have somebody to talk to, bring in some sort of emotional support concepts. You can bring nature into the office if you have people that are actually coming into the office to create a better sense of well-being. We know that when we have trees or plants and nature scenery within an office, it actually helps people feel more energized and improves sort of cognitive abilities and prevents cognitive fatigue. So there's different things that you can do also within the space to create it to be more effective. A lot of other places have also allowed for, like I said, the places I've come in, we've done meditation sessions to allow people to connect with some spirituality. They have a meditation room, different aspects like that. Again, you can give incentives for people to do a meditation challenge or take a group together and do a walk in nature. So you can do some practice mindfulness and just sort of start creating practices where you're communicating mindfully and that sort of thing. So there's the spiritual piece, and all in that, you're going to be then connecting people together as a community. So forging that community, finding shared values, working on core values, making sure that those are being represented. You create accountability charts to make sure that the core values are being represented and acted upon. And then I always believe in creating succession charts. So, you have people so that they know that where they have a place to go, like, how am I a leader and who am I helping? I mean, one of the things that we learn in medicine, which is see one, do one, teach one. right? So I learn, and then I move on to the next level, and I'm still learning, but I'm teaching the person behind me. So that sort of allows you to remember that in some case you're always in a leadership position, but you're also in a learning position. Hopefully that is enough information to recap.
Sorry, I was on mute there. I'm going to unmute myself now. I just said that was such a great way to close everything up, that bringing up that idea, everyone has something to contribute. Everyone has, someone to look out for. It's like a multi-way street at that company. So yeah, this was great. I know I learned a lot. Thank you so much, Dr. Eva. Dr. Eva Selhub, her new book, Resilience for Dummies, love the title, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you get your books. Thank you so much again. And yeah, this has been the third edition of FI Live Beta. So happy that everyone, that you all joined us. Tune in next time. As always, we're on social media, online. Click us, like us, subscribe, share, comment, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Eva.
Bye.